The fierce Malinois she adopted absolutely, the fierce Malinois she adopted absolutely refused to leave. He planted his paws, staring back into the dark cages, forcing Maya into a choice that would rewrite 3 lives forever. If you believe in the kind of love that refuses to abandon anyone, subscribe to the channel, follow this story to the end, and comment down below with the city you're watching from, so I can see how far this incredible journey has traveled. Maya Vance gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles burned. She had spent the last 3 months trapped in her own home, suffocated by the deafening silence. A botched hostage rescue team operation, a mandatory suspension, a badge locked away in a dark drawer. She needed an anchor. She shoved her car door open and marched toward the concrete entrance of the local animal shelter. She pushed through the heavy front doors. "I need a dog," Maya commanded, her voice entirely devoid of emotion. The middle-aged volunteer behind the desk flinched, startled by the sheer intensity radiating from the woman. "Oh, okay. Name?" she stammered, sliding a battered clipboard across the counter. "Maya Vance." "Occupation?" Maya hesitated, her jaw clenched tight. "Unemployed," she lied, refusing to document her FBI affiliation. "Reason for visiting?" "Just looking." Maya deflected, tossing the pen down. She bypassed the desk, striding directly into the main kennel wing without waiting for an escort. The noise assaulted her instantly. It was a chaotic explosion of barking, whining, and metal rattling violently against metal. Dogs threw their bodies against the chain-link doors, frantic, begging for a savior. Maya's heart rate spiked. The sheer volume of desperation triggered her operational stress. She had negotiated with armed suspects without breaking a sweat, but this raw, unfiltered need made her want to retreat. "I can't do this," she muttered, turning on her heel to leave. But as she pivoted, the noise abruptly died off at the far end of the corridor. A scarred Malinois sat frozen behind the rusted bars. He didn't bark. He didn't pace. He didn't throw himself at the gate. He simply locked his dark, alert eyes directly onto Maya's. "Why isn't he moving?" Maya demanded, stepping closer to the cage. "That's Ranger," the volunteer sighed, hurrying to catch up with her. "He came in a few weeks ago as a stray. He's quiet, very loyal from what we can tell, and doesn't cause trouble." Maya crouched, staring right through the metal. "You've seen some things out there, haven't you?" Ranger didn't retreat. He evaluated her right back, unblinking, holding a heavy stillness that instantly shattered the chaotic noise inside Maya's head. This wasn't a desperate pet looking for a master. This was a survivor recognizing another survivor. "I'll take him," Maya declared, the certainty hitting her bones like a physical strike. "Are you sure? We have others that are more." I said, "I'll take him. Draw up the papers." The paperwork was processed with clinical efficiency. A collar snapped around Ranger's neck. He walked out of the kennel, pacing perfectly beside Maya's leg without an ounce of resistance. They approached the exit. The front doors swung open to the parking lot. Freedom. Ranger's paws locked onto the concrete. Maya tugged the leash. "Come on, Ranger, let's go out." The leash snapped taut. Ranger didn't panic, but he aggressively angled his entire body backward, aiming toward the interior of the shelter. "Hey, it's okay," Maya commanded, instinctively dropping into her practiced crisis negotiation voice. "We're leaving now." Ranger ignored her completely. He stared dead into the dark hallway. His ears shifted back. Staff members stopped working, exchanging puzzled whispers as the standoff stretched into minutes. Most dogs drag us out the door, a tech muttered from the front desk. Maya knelt, a cold unease spiking violently in her chest. She followed the dog's unwavering gaze back into the shadows. Ranger leaned hard against the collar, suffocating himself to pull backward. And then it hit her. A profound twist gripped her gut. He wasn't afraid of leaving. He was waiting for someone. "What is back there?" Maya snapped at the tech, her voice cracking like a whip. "Nothing," the young woman stammered, intimidated. "Just the medical isolation wing." Maya looked back at Ranger. His focus was absolute. The tactical agent inside Maya knew when an asset was holding back critical intel. "You know what?" Maya whispered to the dog, completely dropping her authoritarian tone. "Jira, show me." She completely let the leash go slack. Ranger immediately lunged back into the shelter. Maya chased after him, pushing past the confused staff, navigating deeper into the facility, far away from the bright public areas. "Ma'am, you can't go back there," someone yelled. "Watch me," Maya shot back, not breaking stride. Ranger marched with deliberate, memorized steps until he slammed to a halt in front of a rusted, isolated cage set apart from the others. Inside, an elderly, blind English sheepdog lay wheezing heavily on a thin blanket. He was emaciated, his spine severely curved from age and illness. Ranger shoved his snout violently through the metal bars. The old dog dragged his fragile body forward, fighting for every inch, until their noses collided through the cold steel. The old dog released a shattered, agonizing whine. Ranger stood like a stone wall, absorbing the pain without making a sound. Maya stopped breathing. The realization punched the air straight out of her lungs. Ranger hadn't stopped at the door out of fear. Leaving meant abandoning his partner. "Who is that?" Maya demanded, whirling around to face the shelter manager who had just jogged up behind her. "That's Duke," the older woman breathed, terrified to interrupt the raw moment. "He's not available for adoption. He's in heart failure. People don't ask about him anymore." Ranger instantly threw his body between Maya and Duke's cage. "Let us write to Duke." We had to separate, let us write to Duke. We had to separate them for medical protocols, and Ranger just shut down. He wouldn't eat until Duke ate. He wouldn't sleep. A veterinarian rushed into the hallway, blocking Maya's path. "Hold on. You can't just take Duke." Maya stepped aggressively into the vet's personal space. "Chuka, watch me." "He has advanced joint degeneration and partial vision loss," the vet argued, holding up a medical chart. "His heart could give out. You are setting yourself up for a massive emotional and financial burden. Most people walk away from this." Maya glared at him. "I didn't ask for a prognosis. I asked for the paperwork." "You're making a mistake." "My mistake to make," Maya shot back. She looked down at Ranger. The Malinois hadn't taken his eyes off the vet's hands, tracking every sudden movement. "Look at him," Maya told the vet, pointing sharply at Ranger. "He kept that old man alive in a warehouse. He starved himself so his partner could eat. You separated them because of protocol, and you broke his spirit. I'm not leaving here without fixing your mistake." Ranger turned his head and locked eyes with Maya. He wasn't begging for rescue. He was demanding acknowledgement. Maya's jaw clenched. "Draw up the papers for Duke, too." "Ma'am, you don't understand the responsibility." "Did I stutter?" Maya barked, her voice echoing violently off the concrete walls. "I handle liabilities for a living. I am not leaving this building without both of them. Get the paperwork, now." The staff scrambled. Maya aggressively signed waiver after waiver, absorbing the medical liabilities without flinching. As Maya carried the paperwork back to the kennel, the heavy metal doors banged shut behind her. She knelt beside the cage one last time. All right, Ranger," she whispered, her voice cracking for the first time that day. "We're going home." Ranger didn't celebrate. He simply shifted his weight, aligning himself perfectly parallel to Maya's leg. He didn't look back at Duke. He knew the deal was done. When the technician brought the padded carrier out, Maya supervised every movement. "Support his spine," Maya instructed sharply. "Don't rush." The technician nodded, sweating under her intense scrutiny. As Duke was lowered into the carrier, his cloudy eyes searched frantically until they locked onto Ranger. Ranger pushed his nose through the mesh, snorting softly. The old dog's panicked breathing immediately slowed down. Maya grabbed the handle of the carrier. "Let's move out." They hit the parking lot. The cold air slapped Maya's face, but she operated on pure adrenaline. She secured the carrier in the back seat of her SUV, checking the seatbelts twice. She patted the seat next to it. Ranger leaped in without a sound, instantly pressing his flank against the mesh of the carrier to guard it. Maya slammed the door. She slid into the driver's seat, gripped the steering wheel, and stared at her trembling hands. The suspension, the failed mission, the overwhelming silence of her house, it all vanished. "Copy that," she whispered to the empty front seat, shifting the car into drive. The tires of the SUV hissed against the wet pavement as Maya Vance navigated the slick, rain-soaked streets. Her eyes relentlessly darted to the rearview mirror, tracking the agonizingly shallow rise and fall of Duke's chest. The elderly dog's wheezing filled the cabin, a ragged, wet sound that scraped against Maya's already frayed nerves. Suddenly, the wheezing stopped. Dead silence engulfed the car. Maya slammed the brakes. The heavy vehicle violently skidded to a halt on the gravel shoulder. She ripped off her seatbelt and vaulted into the back seat. Ranger was already reacting. His muscular frame shoved aggressively against the mesh of the carrier, whining a sharp, high-pitched, tactical alert. Maya tore the carrier zipper open. Duke wasn't breathing. His cloudy eyes rolled backward into his skull. Cold, sharp panic flooded Maya's veins, identical to the sheer terror of her botched hostage raid. She violently shoved the memories down. She pressed 2 fingers against Duke's exposed ribs, a terrifyingly faint flutter. She pressed her palm against his sternum and rubbed hard, applying the emergency stimulation tactics drilled into her by field medics. Duke gasped, violently sucking in a wet, rattling breath. Ranger immediately forced his snout forward, aggressively licking the old dog's face, his tense muscles trembling in relief. Maya collapsed backward against the locked car door, her hands shaking so violently she had to clench them into fists. She had faced down armed cartels, but she hadn't felt this raw, this utterly exposed to failure, in years. When they finally reached her house, Maya didn't bother carrying her own bags inside. She kicked the front door open and immediately began stripping the living room with practiced, ruthless efficiency. Her movements were purely tactical, operating on pure adrenaline. The heavy oak coffee table was shoved violently against the far wall. The decorative rug was rolled back to expose the bare hardwood floor, clearing the perimeter. Chuta, the afternoon light pooled the warmest. The afternoon light pooled the warmest. She strategically placed heavy water bowls within a few inches of the mattress, ensuring immediate access. This wasn't a home anymore. She had officially turned it into a forward operating base. Maya returned to the SUV and carefully lifted Duke from the carrier. She carried him inside and lowered him. She carried him inside and lowered him gently onto the prepared mattress. The moment Duke's body hit the fabric, his arthritic joints locked, and he let out a sharp, shattered cry of pain. Before Maya could reach down to adjust his hips, Ranger violently shoved his shoulder against her hip. Maya stumbled back, instantly raising her hands in a defensive posture. But Ranger didn't attack. He stepped directly onto the mattress and wedged his powerful body entirely underneath Duke's fragile chest. Slowly, acting as a living hydraulic lift, Ranger supported the old dog's entire weight, lowering him inch by agonizing inch until Duke could fold his legs properly without snapping a joint. Only when Duke let out a long, exhausted sigh did Ranger finally lie down beside him, curving his body into a tight, protective shield around the blind dog. Maya stood frozen, her throat burning with a sudden, overwhelming pressure. In this house, she might be the owner, but Ranger was the commanding officer. Maya pivoted to the kitchen, dumping the loud plastic bags of pill bottles onto the granite counter. Antibiotics, diuretics, heavy painkillers. She aggressively organized the medication, lining them up, rigidly labeling the caps with a black marker, and mapping out a strict, military-grade timing schedule. Suddenly, her cell phone vibrated violently against the counter. Captain Miller, her commanding officer. Maya stared at the glowing caller ID. If she ignored the call, she was officially violating the terms of her suspension and dodging her mandatory psychological evaluation. If she answered, she would have to explain to a hardened FBI captain why she was playing nurse to two dying dogs instead of fighting to clear her name. The phone buzzed relentlessly on at sunset. Maya prepared a simple meal for her family. She had made her choice. The real war began at sunset. Maya prepared a simple meal for herself, but the food sat entirely untouched on a paper plate as her focus narrowed completely on the mission at hand. She knelt beside the mattress, gripping a plastic syringe filled with liquid painkiller. Duke thrashed his head weakly, terrified of the sharp chemical smell. His jaws clamped shut in a desperate fight for control. Maya gritted her teeth, her fingers pressing into his jawline, trying to force his mouth open. Suddenly, Ranger sat up, his ears pinned flat against his skull, and a deep, guttural growl vibrated intensely in his chest. Maya froze instantly. Her tactical instincts screamed at her to back away from the Malinois, but she held her ground. She looked Ranger dead in the eyes, refusing to break dominance. Ranger leaned closer, letting out a sharp, authoritative bark. Letting out a sharp, authoritative bark. Miraculously, Duke stopped thrashing. He surrendered to his partner's command, parting his jaws just enough. Maya seized the opening, shooting the medicine directly down his throat. Duke swallowed hard and instantly collapsed back against Ranger's fur. Maya dropped the empty syringe, her forehead crashing against the cold hardwood floor as she gasped for air. She had just successfully negotiated a life-or-death hostage situation with a traumatized dog, and she had won his trust. The night immediately stretched into an endless, agonizing vigil. Maya sat rigidly on the bare floor, her back pressed hard against the base of the couch, allowing the sheer physical exhaustion to finally settle deep into her bones. In the dim, shifting shadows of the living room, she watched them. The heavy painkillers finally dragged Duke into a deep, completely unresponsive sleep. But Ranger did not sleep. The Malinois sat bolt upright, his eyes wide open, intensely vigilant, relentlessly scanning the dark corners of the room and staring at the front door. He was standing guard, refusing to let his guard down. Maya recognized that rigid, haunted posture instantly. It was the exact same hypervigilance that had destroyed her own life. The absolute, terrifying refusal to look away, convinced that if you close your eyes for even 1 second, the people you love will die. At exactly 3:14 a.m., the fragile silence was violently shattered. Duke began to convulse. His limbs paddled frantically against the mattress, his spine arching backward as his breath caught in a horrific, choking rattle. Ranger launched himself into the air, barking frantically. A massive seizure. His failing heart was a massive seizure. His failing heart was starving his brain of oxygen. Maya grabbed a thick blanket and aggressively wedged it under Duke's thrashing head to prevent his skull from fracturing against the floor. Ranger was losing his mind, violently circling them, whining in pure, unfiltered agony. Maya threw her upper body entirely over Duke, pinning his trembling torso with her own weight, physically absorbing the violent, terrifying shocks of the old dog's muscles. She buried her face in Duke's neck. "I've got you!" she screamed over the sound of his thrashing, hot tears finally breaking free and tracking violently down her cheeks. "You are not dying tonight. Do you hear me? I am right here." The seizure raged for 45 excruciating seconds before Duke's body suddenly went completely, horrifyingly limp. Maya stopped breathing entirely. She pressed her ear violently against his ribs, praying to a god she hadn't spoken to in years. Thump, thump, thump. A slow, damaged but incredibly stubborn heartbeat pushed against her ear. Duke let out a massive, shuddering sigh and slipped backward into unconsciousness. Maya slumped backward against the couch, completely drained of every ounce of fight she had left. Ranger immediately crawled forward, dragging his belly across the floor. He didn't check on Duke. Instead, the fierce, scarred Malinois laid his heavy head directly onto Maya's lap, looking up at her with a profound, shattering gratitude. Maya buried her trembling hands deep into Ranger's fur, gripping the dog like a lifeline. Sitting in the suffocating darkness of her living room, stripped of her badge, her team, and her pride, Maya Vance finally understood the terrible weight of her decision. This wasn't a rescue. This was a war of attrition against death itself. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't fighting alone. Morning broke without the violent crackle of police radios or the adrenaline-fueled shouts of a tactical breach. Maya Vance peeled her bloodshot eyes open. Her muscles screamed in immediate protest, locked in the exact same rigid posture against the base of the couch since the seizure hours ago. She scanned the room with terrifying precision. Ranger was already awake. The scarred Malinois sat perfectly upright, his body wedged tightly against Duke. Maya held her breath, waiting for the devastating silence of a stopped heart. Instead, she heard it. Duke's breathing was shallow but undeniably steady. A fractured, exhausted exhale punched its way out of Maya's lungs. She pushed herself off the hardwood floor and marched straight to the kitchen. The battle was far from over. She poured the specialized veterinary kibble into a bowl, mixing in the heavy crushed antibiotics with aggressive, practiced strikes of a spoon. She knelt beside the mattress and shoved the bowl under Duke's nose. "Eat!" she commanded, her voice cracking with unspoken desperation. Duke weakly turned his blind head away, his body curling into constant tension, completely refusing the food. Panic flared instantly in Maya's chest. If he didn't eat, the medication would tear his stomach lining apart. She reached forward to physically force his jaw open again, But Ranger violently, aggressively bumped his shoulder against her arm. Maya flinched back. Ranger stepped over the bowl. He didn't eat his own food. Instead, he shoved his wet nose directly against Duke's cheek, issuing a low, vibrating rumble in his throat. It wasn't a threat. It was a pure, undeniable command from one soldier to another. Duke hesitated. Slowly, agonizingly, the old dog dragged his chin toward the bowl and took a careful bite. He chewed slowly, but willingly. Maya rocked back on her heels, completely stunned. She had spent years mastering interrogation and compliance, but this dog possessed an authority she could not replicate. Suddenly, 3 sharp knocks hammered against the front door. Maya's hand instinctively slapped against her right hip, frantically searching for a service weapon that was locked in a safe. Her heart rate violently spiked. Was it Captain Miller? Was it Internal Affairs coming to drag her into a boardroom? She stalked toward the door, checking the peephole with the lethal focus of a sniper. A woman in her early 40s stood on the porch, wearing running shoes and a light jacket. Maya yanked the door open just enough to block the gap with her body. "Can I help you?" Maya barked, her tone dripping with hostility. The neighbor offered a warm smile, her posture completely relaxed. "Hi, I'm Sarah from next door. I saw your lights blazing all night. I just wanted to make sure everything was okay." She glanced down at Ranger, who had silently moved to stand guard directly between Maya's legs. The neighbor complimented the dogs without prying into Maya's business, offering help without any expectation of a reward. Maya stared at the woman. The sheer normalcy of the interaction felt like a physical slap to the face. Maya suddenly realized how long it had truly been since anyone had spoken to her without needing something from her, without demanding a tactical assessment or a casualty report. We had a rough night," Maya forced out, the defensive armor fracturing just a fraction of an inch. "But we are holding the line. Thank you." "Anytime," Sarah nodded, turning to jog down the steps. The exchange was incredibly brief, simple, and human, yet it hit Maya with a weight that mattered far more than she ever expected. She shut the door, her back sliding down the heavy wood until she hit the floor. Did not rush forward with terrifying urgency or immediately collapse into blinding grief. Instead, the grueling passage of time unfolded quietly, day by day, measured entirely in small, measurable changes that only a highly trained observer paying close attention would notice. Maya's days completely shifted. They no longer began with blaring alarms and high-stakes tactical briefings. Her entire existence narrowed down to strictly timed medication schedules, highly supervised walks in the backyard, and watching the sunlight stretch across the living room floor. The next major terrifying shift happened on a Tuesday afternoon. Maya was filling the water bowls when she heard a sickening scrape of claws against hardwood. She spun around. Duke was trying to stand on his own. His severely arthritic back legs trembled violently. Maya dropped the bowls, water splashing everywhere, and lunged forward. "Duke, down!" she yelled, terrified his hips would snap. But Ranger intercepted. Moving with lightning speed, Ranger didn't push Duke down. Instead, he adjusted his own movements instinctively, slowing his pace to perfectly match the old dog's, and deliberately positioned his thick, muscular body directly underneath Duke so the failing dog could lean his entire weight against him while standing. Ranger acted as a living, breathing brace. He rested his heavy head near Duke's chest, listening intently for the reassurance that the old dog's heart was still beating strong enough to stay. Maya stopped dead in her tracks, her boots sliding on the spilled water. A massive psychological twist ripped through her mindset. She was treating Duke like a fragile hostage that needed constant saving. But Ranger was treating Duke like a partner who still had a fight left in him. Maya forced herself to step back. She had to relinquish total control. She learned the subtle rhythm of Duke's needs, the hidden signs of fatigue, and most importantly, she learned to look at the way Ranger would glance at her when something felt off. As the grip of imminent death slightly loosened, Ranger changed too. He still guarded Duke with a quiet, unyielding vigilance. But a sudden, undeniable joy erupted in the way he confidently followed Maya through the house, completely grounded and certain of his place. It was not fear-based obedience. It was an absolute sense of belonging. The house transformed around them. The bare, tactical living room officially became a shared, permanent space rather than a temporary medical stop. Dog beds remained firmly in place. Rubber chew toys suddenly appeared, chosen carefully by Maya so Duke could interact without physical strain. Ranger learned the invisible boundaries of the home, finally guarding the front doors less and resting his exhausted muscles more. And Maya, for the first time in her adult life, I'd learned how to sit perfectly still without feeling a suffocating restlessness. She actually found herself reading again in the quiet evenings. Not classified case files, but fiction novels she barely remembered starting. Just as the silence no longer pressed against her throat like a blade, the outside world violently crashed back in. Maya's encrypted government laptop, shoved under a pile of mail on the kitchen island, suddenly emitted a sharp, piercing alarm. A Level 1 priority notification. Active. Maya stared at the glaring white active. Maya stared at the glaring white text. Her pulse hammered fiercely against her ribs. The suspension was over. The review board had cleared her. They wanted her back on the hostage rescue team immediately. She had exactly 48 hours to report to the Seattle field office to reclaim her badge, her gun, and the only identity she had ever known. If she refused, her resignation would be finalized permanently. She turned her head slowly, looking back into the living room. The afternoon sun dipped low, painting the walls in a warm gold. Duke lay completely asleep, his breathing slow and even. Ranger rested on the floor, his head placed heavily on Maya's abandoned knee, his eyes half closed but intensely alert. Maya walked over and dropped to the floor beside them. She ran her trembling fingers deeply through Ranger's fur, feeling the solid, steady warmth radiating beneath her hand. The tactical agent inside her screamed to pack a bag and head to headquarters. But the woman sitting on the floor, anchored by 2 broken dogs, felt something entirely different. The glowing screen of the encrypted government laptop cast a harsh, unforgiving light across Maya's face. Subject: Mandatory Reinstatement Hearing. 48 hours. The deadline hammered relentlessly in her skull. She slammed the laptop shut with a violent crack. Ranger instantly flinched from his position on the floor, his ears pinning flat against his skull. Maya shoved herself off the hardwood. The FBI was demanding an immediate answer. She needed to know if she could still physically leave this house, if she could still effortlessly become the cold, detached, tactical operator she used to be. She marched straight to the hallway closet. She violently spun the dial on her heavy steel safe. The metal door clicked open. Inside sat her service weapon, her tactical holster, and the heavy gold FBI shield. She reached in, her fingers wrapping tight around the badge. It felt entirely alien in her palm. The cold metal used to violently define her entire identity. Now, it just felt like a useless, suffocating anchor dragging her down. She aggressively clipped the holster to her belt, desperate to feel the familiar weight. She to forcefully prove to herself that Special Agent Maya Vance still existed. But the second the metal buckle snapped shut, a sharp, terrified yelp echoed from the kitchen. Maya instantly ripped the holster off, letting it crash violently to the floor, and sprinted down the hall. Duke had collapsed near the water bowl. His severely arthritic front legs had completely given out, his chin slamming hard against the linoleum. Ranger was already there, frantically shoving his heavy snout aggressively under Duke's chest, whining in absolute unfiltered distress. Maya hit the floor hard on her knees. She grabbed Duke's heavy support harness, hauling his frail body upward, while Ranger immediately wedged his thick, muscular shoulder directly under the old dog's ribs to stabilize his spine. They operated in perfect, unspoken tactical tandem. Once Duke was safely lowered back onto his mattress, Maya collapsed hard against the base of the kitchen cabinets. Her chest heaved violently. If she went back to the hostage rescue team, she would disappear for 14, sometimes 18 hours a day. She would be deploying to chaotic, active shooter situations, barricaded suspects, leaving these two completely broken souls totally defenseless. She stared intensely at Ranger. The Malinois was gently licking Duke's ear, offering pure, unconditional comfort. Ranger wasn't calculating risk. He wasn't desperately looking for a tactical exit strategy. He was simply honoring a profound bond that asked for absolutely nothing but pure presence. Maya forced herself to stand up. She had to forcefully test her own psychological limits. She grabbed her car keys off the counter and aggressively marched toward the front door. "Ranger, stay," she commanded, her voice dropping perfectly into her absolute authoritarian field tone. Ranger didn't flinch. Instead of obeying, the scarred Malinois immediately lunged forward and forcefully shoved his heavy body horizontally across the doorframe, physically barricading the exit. "Move," Maya barked, her heart rate violently spiking. She pushed her knee aggressively against his ribs. Ranger dug his claws violently into the hardwood, refusing to yield a single inch. He glared up at her, his dark eyes flashing with a furious, desperate warning. He wasn't going to let her abandon them. Maya gritted her teeth, stood outside. The icy Seattle wind stood outside. The icy Seattle wind cutting sharply through her shirt. "I have to be able to leave," she desperately told herself, her nails digging into her palms. "I have to be a federal agent." 10 agonizing seconds passed. Then a horrific, panicked thrashing erupted from the other side of the wood. Duke was screaming. The blind, fragile dog had woken up, realized Maya was gone, and was violently thrashing his broken body against the floorboards in pure terror. Ranger began slamming his heavy paws frantically against the front door, barking in a deafening, hysterical pitch. Maya's psychological armor completely shattered into 1,000 pieces. She violently twisted the deadbolt, ripping the door back open, and threw herself onto the floor. "I'm here! I'm here!" she screamed, Certeza aggressively pulling Duke's trembling head tightly into her chest. Ranger instantly collapsed against her back, panting heavily, his whole body shaking in sheer relief. Maya buried her face deeply in Duke's fur, her own hot tears soaking into his coarse coat. She had completely and utterly failed the test. But the devastating failure felt exactly like the most undeniable truth she had ever faced in her life. Suddenly, her cell phone vibrated violently on the kitchen island. The caller ID flashed Captain Miller. The 48 hours had abruptly shrunk to 0. Command wanted an answer right now. Maya stared at the aggressively buzzing device. Her stomach violently twisted into sickening knots. This was the exact, irreversible moment that would permanently define the rest of her existence. She reached out, her fingers trembling wildly, and hit the answer button. "Vance!" Miller's gruff, impatient voice barked through the speaker, carrying the heavy, high-stakes tension of the bureau. "The review board officially cleared you. I need my absolute best breach commander back on the active roster. We have a major domestic terrorism op spinning up right now. I need you geared up and in the bullpen by 0600 tomorrow. Plus, Command is tossing in a full promotion to team lead if you sign the active duty papers today." Maya stopped breathing entirely. Team lead. It was the exact promotion she had violently sacrificed her entire personal life, her sanity, and her relationships to achieve. It was the ultimate, undeniable validation that she was not a broken failure. She opened her mouth to aggressively accept the orders. The word "copy" sat right on the tip of her tongue, ready to launch her back into the war zone. But as she opened her mouth, Ranger walked slowly across the room. The Malinois didn't demand any frantic attention. He just sat heavily onto Maya's foot, deliberately leaning his entire body weight against her shin, then physically grounding her to the floor. She looked deep into his calm, impossibly trusting eyes. She remembered the suffocating noise of the concrete shelter. She remembered the absolute, undeniable truth she had realized while sitting on the floor. Ranger's fierce loyalty had done something far more profoundly difficult than any tactical operation she had ever run. It had violently reached past her ironclad FBI training, utterly bypassed her thick emotional defenses, and forcefully returned her to herself. "Captain," Maya forced the word out, her voice dropping into a low, completely unshakable register. "I am officially declining the reinstatement." Dead silence swallowed the other end of the line. "Say again, Vance? You're forcefully throwing away a 10-year elite career because you're suddenly scared to get back into the stack?" "I'm not scared of the stack, sir," Maya fired back, her heart hammering an incredibly steady, powerful rhythm against her ribs. She honestly didn't know if she would ever return to law enforcement, or if she would ever carry a weapon again. But for the very first time in her chaotic, violent adult life, the absolute terrifying uncertainty of her future did not frighten her in the slightest. "I have a completely different mission now. I am officially tendering my resignation." She didn't wait for his explosive, furious reaction. She aggressively hit the end call button. The line went totally dead. Maya dropped the phone onto the counter. Her hands had completely stopped shaking. A massive, suffocating psychological weight she hadn't even realized she was carrying instantly evaporated from her shoulders, leaving her completely breathless. She walked slowly back down the hallway to the closet. She picked up the heavy tactical holster off the floor and tossed it violently back into the dark corner of the steel safe. She threw the gold FBI shield in right beside it. She violently slammed the heavy metal door shut and spun the combination lock, securing it forever. The badge remained permanently locked away. The war she had been fighting with herself was officially over. Maya walked back into the living room and dropped heavily, cross-legged, onto the bare floor. She thought brutally about the agonizing past few months, the terrifying, irreversible decisions made, the professional paths she had just permanently abandoned, and the relentless, suffocating expectations she had once violently forced upon herself. Real strength, she finally and completely understood now, was absolutely not about grueling physical endurance or commanding absolute authority over others. Sometimes, raw, unfiltered strength was simply about having the profound guts to stay when walking away would have been incredibly easy. It was about intentionally choosing crushing responsibility over selfish comfort. Duke let out a soft, rattling sigh in his sleep, his fragile body completely relaxing into the mattress. Ranger heavily shifted his weight, resting his chin aggressively on Maya's knee. Maya ran her thumb fiercely over the deep, jagged scar on Ranger's ear. She had furiously driven to that shelter, thinking she was going to rescue a single dog to forcibly fix her broken, isolated life. She was completely wrong. Maya ran her thumb fiercely over the deep, jagged scar on Ranger's ear. Battered the roof above them. The absolute, terrifying truth washed over her. Ranger hadn't just saved Duke's life in that abandoned warehouse. He had just aggressively intercepted Maya's destructive trajectory, physically forcing her to stand down and reclaim her own humanity. The weeks that immediately followed brutally tested that new revelation. There were no miraculous recoveries. There was no sudden cinematic healing. Duke's body was actively and aggressively shutting down. Maya completely abandoned her aggressive tactical mindset, trading her crisis negotiation skills for the grueling, agonizing reality of end-of-life hospice care. She no longer aggressively forced Duke to eat. When the elderly dog weakly turned his head away from the bowl, Maya simply nodded, calmly pulled the food away, and filled a plastic syringe with liquid morphine. She knelt beside the mattress. "Easy, old man," she whispered, her voice completely stripped of its former authoritarian edge. She gently slid the syringe past his teeth. Duke swallowed weakly, his cloudy eyes rolling back as the heavy painkiller flooded his failing system. Suddenly, Ranger violently shoved his thick skull under Maya's arm. He didn't whine. He didn't bark. He simply wedged his heavy body aggressively against Duke's spine and locked his dark, intense eyes onto Maya. Ranger knew. The fierce Malinois, who had fought animal control officers and starved himself to protect his partner, was officially signaling surrender. The fight was over. Maya's breath hitched in her throat. She immediately grabbed her cell phone and dialed the shelter's affiliated veterinarian. "It's Maya Vance," she stated, her voice remarkably, terrifyingly steady. "It's time. I need you at my house. Now." The agonizing 45 minutes it took for the veterinarian to arrive felt like a grueling combat deployment. Maya did not pace. She did not violently punch the walls or barricade her emotions. She sat cross-legged on the hard floor directly facing the mattress. She pulled Duke's heavy head firmly onto her lap, her fingers steadily tracing the gray fur around his ears. Ranger lay positioned directly across from her, his massive paws securely wrapping around Duke's fragile front legs. They formed an unbreakable physical perimeter around the dying dog. When the heavy knock finally hit the front door, Ranger didn't jump up to guard the entryway. He simply tightened his grip on Duke. Maya carefully shifted Duke's head onto a rolled blanket, stood up, and opened the door. The veterinarian walked in, carrying a small, heavy black medical case. He took one look at the scene in the living room and stopped dead in his tracks. "I'm sorry, Maya," the vet murmured, dropping his professional detachment as he witnessed the profound, heavy grief suffocating the room. "You gave him a hell of a final chapter?" "Just tell me what happens next," Maya commanded quietly, her eyes locking onto the black case. "I'll administer a heavy sedative first," the vet explained, his hands moving quickly to prepare the syringes. "So he'll fall into a very deep sleep. He won't feel any pain. Then I'll administer the final injection. It stops the heart almost instantly." A massive psychological twist violently ripped through Maya's chest. Her entire adult life, her entire FBI career, had been obsessively dedicated to violently pulling people back from the brink of death. She was trained to shoot, to breach, to apply tourniquets, to aggressively fight the Reaper at all costs, to intentionally authorize death, to willingly invite it into her home, went against every single tactical instinct permanently hardwired into her brain. She felt a sudden, terrifying urge to scream at the vet to leave, to grab Duke and race him to an emergency clinic, to fight until the bitter, agonizing end. But then she looked at Ranger. The scarred Malinois deliberately leaned forward and pressed his wet nose firmly against Duke's fading heartbeat. Ranger wasn't fighting the inevitable. He was fiercely protecting his partner's right to leave this world with absolute dignity. Maya swallowed the massive lump of terror in her throat. She dropped violently back onto her knees, sliding her hands securely under Duke's chest. "Do it," she ordered. The vet expertly slid the needle into the IV line. "Sedative is in." Duke let out a massive, shuddering sigh. The intense, agonizing tension that had gripped his frail spine for months instantly melted away. His heavy head sank deeply into Maya's palms. He was completely, finally, at peace. "He's asleep," the vet whispered. "Are you ready?" Maya locked eyes with Ranger. The Malinois issued a low, vibrating rumble deep in his chest, an undeniable acknowledgement. "We're ready," Maya confirmed, completely refusing to break her gaze away from Ranger's. The vet administered the final dose. 10 seconds passed, then 20. The room plunged into a suffocating, heavy silence. The agonizing, she leaned forward and pressed her forehead, firmly against Duke's motionless skull. "Stand down, soldier," she whispered fiercely into his fur. "Your watch is over." Suddenly, Ranger threw his head back. He didn't aggressively bark or frantically thrash. He unleashed a single, devastatingly loud, piercing howl that violently shattered the silence of the house. It was a raw, primal scream of absolute grief and profound honor. The sound tore straight through Maya's chest, completely shattering the last remaining fragments of her emotional armor. She grabbed Ranger's heavy collar, violently pulling the massive dog into her chest, burying her face completely into his neck as the hot, uncontrollable tears finally broke free. Ranger immediately stopped howling. He wrapped his heavy neck around her shoulder, forcefully pressing his weight against her, physically absorbing her shattering grief just as he had absorbed Duke's pain. They sat on the floor for hours. The vet quietly backed out of the house, leaving them to navigate the devastating aftermath. Maya eventually stood up, her joints screaming in protest, and carefully covered Duke's body with a clean, heavy blanket. The mission was officially complete. The next morning, the house was devastatingly quiet. Maya woke up on the couch, her muscles locked and aching. She immediately shot upright, panic automatically flooding her veins as she instinctively searched for the sick dog. The empty mattress sat violently vacant in the center of the room. The reality hit her like a physical blow to the stomach, but before the crushing isolation could drag her under, a heavy, wet nose aggressively, forcefully bumped her elbow. Maya looked down. Ranger stood squarely beside the couch. He held a thick, rubber chew toy firmly in his jaws. He wasn't staring at the empty mattress. He wasn't pacing the hallway looking for Duke. He was looking directly at Maya, his ears perked, his dark eyes radiating a fierce, undeniable purpose. Maya stared at the scarred dog, a profound, fundamental realization locked into place. Ranger hadn't just lost his partner, he had deliberately transferred his absolute loyalty. To Sing, he was actively stepping into the void, fiercely demanding that Maya stay present, forcefully pulling her back from the edge of her own darkness. He was telling her that surviving wasn't enough. They had to actually live. Maya slowly reached out and grabbed the edge of the rubber toy. Ranger immediately growled playfully, violently yanking his head back, engaging her in a fierce tug-of-war. Maya pulled back, her boots bracing aggressively against the floorboards. For the first time in over a year, a genuine, unguarded laugh ripped its way out of Maya's throat. It was a rusty, broken sound, but it was incredibly, undeniably real. She violently hauled herself off the couch, marching straight to the front door with Ranger eagerly snapping at her heels. She grabbed the leash. She didn't hesitate. She didn't aggressively scan the perimeter for threats. She yanked the front door open, letting the bright, piercing Seattle sunlight violently flood the dark entryway. Ranger practically launched himself onto the porch, his tail violently wagging, his heavy body vibrating with raw, unfiltered energy. Maya locked the door behind them and stepped out into the world. She wasn't an FBI agent anymore. She wasn't a hostage negotiator. She was simply a survivor, walking side by side with another survivor. They had violently fought death. They had grieved, and they had permanently changed each other's cellular makeup. Sometimes what makes us strongest is not the power we carry, but the lives we choose not to leave behind. Sometimes what we call a miracle doesn't arrive with thunder or light from the sky. Sometimes it comes quietly through loyalty, compassion, and the courage to stay when walking away would be easier. Maya Vance finally understood that true strength wasn't about holding a gun or breaching a door. It was about holding the line for someone who could no longer fight for themselves. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who believes in second chances. Leave a comment with your thoughts and subscribe to the channel so more stories of hope can be told. May God bless you, guide you, and protect you and your loved ones today and always.